This is episode 282 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined this week by somebody who I've gotten to know well, but listeners and watchers of this podcast and radio show may not know very well. He is Clint Pagurko, and he is an intern / policy analyst. We like to amp it up a little bit at the Rio Grande Foundation. Welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Clint.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and Clint has been working very hard with the Rio Grande Foundation for the last 2 months. He is a native of Michigan, and we'll get to that in just a second. But your time with us is coming to an end right about the time of the end of the session, which works out very well for your experience with the foundation. But tell us a little bit about yourself and what caused you to come to the land of enchantment.
Well, I'm a recent graduate of Hillsdale College, majored in history and German, but I've always really been interested in politics and economics, something I grew up talking about that kind of stuff around the dinner table, and so I've always been really involved, I was involved with a political organization on campus at Hillsdale, so I've wanted for a long time to kind of try out the world of policy and, be an intern somewhere. Life circumstances didn't allow that till now. But I was able to visit New Mexico a few times last year and really, really liked the area. Obviously very different from the East Coast where I'm originally from. And that was really beautiful. And then by chance came across the foundation, scrolling through Twitter. There was an interaction between you and one of my favorite professors, Dr. Berzer. He was on the show a while back, and so I looked into the foundation. So I had an internship program. And it worked really well with my schedule and getting done with school in the fall, kind of at a weird time, and figured it'd be a great opportunity for me to get into policy and learn more about New Mexico and experience the beauty here as well as all the problems that come with it, unfortunately.
Nice. Well, that is Professor Bradley Berzer, and I don't have the exact episode number, but I know it was a 4th of July Independence Day episode that we recorded with him, and he's, of course, a history professor and had a lot of fascinating things to say, and it's great that we were able to make that connection indirectly through this podcast and radio show. So glad to have that happen. And most folks that come to us as interns wind up working for us during the summer, but you got not only a 60-day legislative session, you got the first ever completely original, newfangled virtual legislative session. So I definitely want to talk to you about Hillsdale College, but what's your impression of the legislative sessions and just the approach taken? Not that you have a ton to compare it to, but just first impressions as somebody who is interested in politics, but a little bit new to this whole process.
What really struck me was how it seems like there's a lot of bureaucratic procedure that has to go down. I've been reading through these bills as they're introduced, and there's been, I want to say, over 800 bills introduced up in the roundhouse. And I was just looking this morning, and it seems like very few of them have actually made it through one chamber into the next. And there have been a handful that have been signed, but there's so much work that has to get done. Just these bills going through committee. Hearing public comment, arguments within the committee itself. So there's a lot of work that happens that if you're not really paying attention, you really don't see, which may be a good or bad thing, that it takes a long time for these bills to get through the legislature. But that was really interesting to see. Usually we just hear that a bill is, being talked about in the House, or that it passed past Congress or something when we're talking about the national level, but that obscures, I think, really the hard work of the legislature, which seems to be more in the committees even. So that was, something you learn about. You hear about these committees, but you don't really know what that means. So it's been really interesting to sit in on those, to give a comment in some of them and see kind of how the sausage gets made.
Exactly, yeah. And we've definitely put you to work, among other things, and certainly not exclusively, but mostly you've spent a lot of time listening to committee hearings, and you can find Clint's handiwork at errorsoфenchantment.com. He has written a lot of testimony and kind of tried to share with relevant committees what the Rio Grande Foundation takes in terms of a position or our view on various pieces of legislation. Is there anything that surprises you about that process? Have you heard from any members of these committees or maybe members of the public and said, right on, or you're crazy, or somewhere in between?
Not very often. Every now and then I'll get an email back from a legislator saying, thank you for your comment. Always happy to hear from the public. But usually it's kind of radio silence. So
Yeah.
I'm never quite sure if how much they see and read my emails, but hopefully they're getting through.
Yeah, well, in Michigan, I don't know if you know much about your own legislature up there, but in Michigan, it's a full-time legislature. I don't know how much staff they have, but it's definitely a more quote unquote professional body. Here in New Mexico, for better or for worse, we have a relatively unpaid. They have something called per diem, which even that within a virtual session is very complicated, and I'm not sure how that's all going to work out. But there's very limited staff for these folks, and by and large, what happens is that individual legislators either have a email that they use exclusively for legislative matters so that they can, do their best to try to keep track of that, along with personal notes that they want to send to people because, you do get a lot of information. So it's not surprising to me that you see little in the way of response and interaction. And it's not just you, it's quite frankly, members of the public and other folks often don't hear much. So, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, but yeah, it's a very different approach from Michigan.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too because I think obviously there are some bills, some really high profile ones, like some of the mandated sick leave bills that we've looked at, that I'm sure they probably get hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of emails about these bills. And then there's some other ones like one you and I were looking at the other day about the cottage food industry that I think kind of flew more under the radar. There was actually someone, one of the legislators spoke in committee about how they didn't really get that much public comment about it because it really just hadn't been publicized. But I think when we're able to look at some of these bills and look at, do some research, compare it to other states, I think that's very valuable for the legislature for us to come in and say hey, for that bill, for instance, there's really no food safety concerns that we have. We've looked at other states, and it's a perfectly safe bill to pass in terms of public health. So I think that's valuable, especially as a part-time legislature with limited staff. They're certainly not experts in, all of the dozens of topics that come up in the legislature, and they have only so much time to read about it during the legislative sessions.
Yeah, and it's also one of the issues that we have philosophically as an organization with the virtual session is that it is difficult to get in touch with these legislators, especially really crunch time is already going on in Santa Fe, it's not just Santa Fe; they're all over the state. But in the legislature, this is the time, and it's really been going on for a week or two, where long hours tend to kick in, and it gets pretty challenging for those folks. And yeah, the fact remains, though, and I've been up there during a normal legislative session. You haven't, that. Even during the most busy time of the session, you can at least flag somebody down in the hallways up there. Now it is you've got to be talking on their wavelength or texting them on their personal phone or something, because anybody no matter how well connected, is going to face some challenges in getting in touch with legislators, especially those they don't necessarily agree with. And I don't know, what is it? What's the ratio of bills that we are opposing versus supporting in general?
Oh gosh, I wouldn't be surprised if it was 10-1.
Yeah, I think we at the Rio Grande Foundation, it's not a surprise given the way the last election went, but there's a lot of bad bills up there.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do have a few. I have this big spreadsheet that I'm keeping track of, the different bills that we want to pay attention to, and I've got them highlighted in different colors of, this is a bill about gun rights, this is a bill about, education reform, and the ones that I have highlighted green are far fewer than the ones I have highlighted yellow and brown.
Yeah, and by the way, that cottage food bill is HB 177. It essentially allows people to start a small home-based business where they cook food that is not, I believe, perishable, and it's got some protections in it that you can't, make your filet mignon and sell that on the street corner, but you can make, I don't know, biscuititos or something like that. So, yeah, it's one of a handful of good bills, and we'll see if it makes its way through the process on that. Were you surprised that the ratio was so big in terms of how many bills were negative towards human freedom versus positive?
Not particularly. I think that comes partially from my own priors, and also, we talked about before the session started about kind of what to expect. So, and I think with the Republicans kind of on the back foot right now in the legislature, I'm not surprised to see them kind of working more in the defensive role rather than trying to push hard legislation that probably, frankly, isn't often going to go very far.
And by the way, I don't know if when push comes to shove at the end of this session, we will be down in the number of bills that we have. But 60-day sessions are the unlimited session where everything goes. And they actually had tried, because of the virtual nature of this session at one point, to limit, I think, people to legislators like 5 bills or something to try to make it a little less onerous. It didn't really happen. I don't know if we'll have the same or more or about equal terms of a traditional legislative session, but it'll be interesting to see how that goes. So you've not just been working on legislative issues. Share a little bit about other topics. I know government transparency is something you've been working on, so talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so one of my big projects has been, exercising New Mexico's rights under the Inspection of Public Records Act to request payroll records from all kinds of different public bodies in the state. So city governments, county governments, school districts, also some from police departments. We were looking at how much the state police were spending to, have a dozen cars up guarding the roundhouse when there's, no one even walking around even to see it.
we had a trip up to Santa Fe, you and I, and we walked around the legislature early on in the session, and it's to say it looks like an armed camp is not. I don't think that's an understatement.
Yeah, I think there were more cops up there than there were sightseers, but I guess maybe that's not too surprising. But yeah, so that's one thing I've been working on. It's been interesting to kind of interact with that government transparency and our rights as citizens. I will say for the most part, people have been very forthcoming. Really haven't had too many issues getting records. As is my right under the law. Running into a few issues here and there where people aren't getting back to me, but definitely be following up with them in the future.
Yeah, and your information is compiled at Heirs of Enchantment. We're going to come up with a little bit more, hopefully, a better way to present that transparency data. But you've got school districts, not all of them, but a lot of them, made colleges and universities.
Yes, that's correct.
And their payrolls. So this is payroll. What other bodies?
County governments and city governments is what I've been doing. Yeah. So that's, I think, something we wanted to look at, as a lot of people have been, unable to work during the past year. Maybe they've lost their business, they've lost their jobs entirely. A lot of these, government employees, they have had job security. Certainly not saying the pandemic has been hard on them too, but, teachers haven't been in schools. A lot of them until recently, for almost a year. We've talked about, Albuquerque Public Schools decided not to go back until I think they recently announced that they would consider going back if Bernalillo County was able to make it to the green tier under the governor's rubric before a certain date.
I think it was like May 1st, and it's that's an interesting point because it was definitely a newsworthy item this morning as we record this on Monday, I believe the 8th here of March, that the district is saying they need to be in the green, but now, kind of out of the blue, as our governors want to do, she said that she's going to allow teachers to move to the front of the line, which, if she was going to do that, why not do that at the outset so that kids could be back in school? I'm not saying this is the policy I would prefer. I would prefer to get them into the classroom regardless because I don't think you're maximizing the vaccine benefit. But if you're going to do it, why wait till now? Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, so we're just looking at that and trying to establish a baseline. So as we have these bills coming through to increase teacher pay, government employee pay. We can kind of look at it and say kind of compare to the past. And I think it's always good. Transparency has its own merit by itself. And then when you have issues like this come up and why are teachers being paid more if they're not in the classroom? Like quite frankly, the science shows that teachers are safe in the classroom as even safer than out and about doing their shopping. So as they're getting these raises, we can kind of maybe hold them accountable for that, hold the legislature accountable for that.
Yeah, now since we'll talk COVID a little bit here. Michigan, I would say generally speaking, they have a political culture that's somewhat more conservative than we have here in New Mexico. But you have been blessed, quote, by having a governor that has been just as aggressive and kind of hypocritical in her approach to the COVID situation. I'm talking about Christine Whitmer, I believe that's her name, and talk about how COVID has been handled a little bit in your home state of Michigan, and if you've noticed any, how similar it is or how different it's been from your experience here in New Mexico.
Yeah, well, I've been a little bit isolated because I was in school during the fall, so I was, focused on my studies, and then I came here for the spring. But I just saw an update a couple days ago that they're allowing more things in Michigan. Believe gyms are able to be open to a certain degree. I know restaurants have been allowed to have indoor seating for a while now, which obviously is a much bigger deal in Michigan, where it's probably 20 degrees right now, than New Mexico, where it's bright and sunny out today. I know they were allowing funerals up to 50 people.
Do you know when that started back in Michigan?
It was sometime last week, I believe.
To my okay, so pretty recently. To my knowledge, I don't think they're doing funerals. I guess churches are open, so I guess maybe under that component, and that's just it. But it's been kind of the same. There hasn't been this general framework offered by the governor. It's been picking and choosing, just like here, right?
Right, that's correct. I would say it's probably even a little bit more unclear than it is here because there is no such thing as the red, yellow, green rubric like there is here. So it's all kind of it's very arcane. I remember back at school, it was always kind of this weird dance of like, we're back in person, but how long are we able to be allowed to have in-person classes? And then after Thanksgiving, they said, okay, everything has to be virtual, but then we weren't sure if we were going to have to leave campus or, if we could stay on campus and just, do school from our rooms or how all that was going to work. So it's been a weird kind of tango with the government trying to figure out what exactly we're allowed to do and what we aren't.
And I'll, this is where we'll get into it's not just a normal school you're going to. You're not going to Michigan State or University of Michigan. You're going to, went to, I should say, unless you're going to do graduate work, and maybe you are, but Hillsdale College. Talk a little bit about your take on Hillsdale. It's certainly known from even New Mexico, and we've been at events and whatnot where people said, "Oh, you go to Hillsdale," and that is the conversation starter among our crowd.
Yes, yes.
I don't know how it works with the girls, but with people in the conservative movement, Hillsdale will get you everywhere. So, give us your impression of Hillsdale as a student and some of the things you enjoy. Anything you don't care for so much, but and the impression it leaves with people across the country, including right here in New Mexico.
Yeah, so I think Hillsdale is best known for kind of its politics department. I think the administration, Dr. Larry Arnn is a politics professor. He does teach one or two classes a semester about on I believe Winston Churchill and Aristotle. So it's known for its politics, and I think to a somewhat lesser degree its economics. We are one of the few schools in the country who teaches Austrian economics. The school of von Mises. We actually have von Mises' personal library in our school library, which is pretty cool. So it's known as a very conservative school, and I would say that's a pretty accurate assessment. But as a student, certainly not all the students are conservative. Not all students are Christian, which I would actually say is a positive as a student. I think when if you are going to college to have all of your priors confirmed, that's not a very healthy environment. So I was able to interact with students from across all kinds of different denominations of Christian as well as those outside the Christian faith. People across the political spectrum. Again, certainly the vast majority of the student body is conservative, Republican, but there were plenty of libertarians, even some people that were on the socialist side of things, which again I think contributed to very healthy kind of environment of debate. To discuss some of these both practical policy implications as well as philosophical. So I was not a politics major, as interested as I am in politics. So I can't speak directly to that. I will say that I personally disagree with some of the positions and stances that the politics department has taken recently. But I had a great experience with both the history and German departments. I did not go in intending to major in German. I just, at Hillsdale, you have to take a few semesters of a foreign language, and it was so excellent. The department was just so excellent. I decided to add that on as a major. The history department is also excellent. Very, very high caliber of professors. We had a professor retire recently who was there for several decades, and we've got some recent hires in the history faculty that are fresh out of grad school, and so it's exciting to see kind of this both kind of this tradition of this high caliber of academics as well as there are still people out there who study history, I think, with a better historiography than sometimes the humanities have this kind of negative reputation right now. But it is good to see that there's still good work being done.
And the school's based in Hillsdale, Michigan. It is one of a couple, maybe, across the country that don't take any federal aid, loans, et cetera, which frees them to do admissions a little differently. I know you may not be familiar with all of that, but dovetailed with that is that Hillsdale is a school of national stature. I went to a college in northern Ohio that I would say 95-ish% of the non-athlete students there were from Ohio. Do you get people from all over the country, all over the world? What's the student population like up there?
Yes.
In that regard.
Yeah. So I can't speak to the latest numbers. I do remember when I matriculated, it was, I believe, less than 50% of the students, fewer than 50% of the students were from Michigan. And we have students from across the country, plenty from California. I knew a girl who was from Alaska, and we have plenty of international students as well.
Was her name Palin? No, just kidding.
No, no, actually it was not. But I knew a student from Israel. We get a couple students every year from Germany. Again, that great relationship with
German.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it does have that carry that weight across the country. So that was pretty cool. One of my friends was from 45 minutes away from my hometown in Michigan, but that's not necessarily representative of the entirety of the student body.
And do you notice at all when you're there because I know they do have a lot of financial aid and opportunities to defray the cost of that college tuition that are beyond those federal dollars. Is it something that you note or notice? Is it manifested in any way as a student that you don't have that restraint from the federal government? Because you know, obviously we know higher ed is a bastion for liberals, people who want to micromanage every aspect of our lives, cancel culture, etc. And I'm sure you have a different perspective from the average college student on that. But this whole idea of not taking the federal dollars. I mean, obviously, you're not applying for student aid through the FAFSA, probably one of the worst documents to ever hit any college student. But is that something you're cognizant of? You notice above and beyond the kind of the political aspect of it?
Yeah, my favorite reference is Hillsdale, so I can't speak to how all that stuff works at other schools, but because of the way student aid is structured at Hillsdale, a lot of times you'll have scholarships that are funded by people that you know their names.
Oh,
Sometimes they're even you have personal relationships with those donors. I had a friend who got to know the people who funded her scholarship pretty well. And every year, I believe every semester, but and they make a big push forward around Thanksgiving time. They have you come in and write thank you notes specifically to the donors who funded your scholarships, as well as anyone else if you want to write thank you notes to professors or your parents or faculty, anyone like that. So I think there is a little bit more. Your money's not coming from the taxpayer, so it's not this faceless mass of Americans, but it's these people wanted to invest in you. These people saw a value in you and your interests, and they want to make it possible for you to have a high quality education. So that was pretty cool that it was so personalized and intentional.
nice. And of course, if you're listening to this and you're wanting to find out more about Hillsdale or any of the presence that they have, which Hillsdale has presence right here in New Mexico. Imprimis is their little circular, if you will. It's printed, it's mailed to. They'll mail you multiple copies if you let them. I can assure you of that. It's something that they definitely spread far and wide. Of course, the Barney Charter School Initiative, which we've had the principal of Estancia Valley Classical Academy on the show, I think over the summer or something, to talk about COVID and the school and what it teaches and how it's different from your average traditional public school. And Hillsdale, I know Dr. Arn has been here multiple times. He must be a very busy guy if he's teaching and traveling around. I don't know that they're classified as fundraising events, but regularly, pre-COVID especially, maybe every year or two, Hillsdale put on a very nice event for, I don't know how they, people who subscribe to Imprimis or, conservative leaders in the community. They certainly have some nice lunch events where they have a speaker come out from Hillsdale. And I haven't seen Dr. Berzer, your old professor, out. I don't know if those are coveted slots for those professors to get, or if it's like, oh God, I have to travel out to wherever to go talk to these people. So
Yeah, I'm not sure. I do remember I took a class from him one semester, and he did have a speaking engagement in, I think, DC or something like that. So it certainly happens.
well, you have not you, but Hillsdale does have a campus in Washington D.C. And I was in the D.C. area. Gosh, it is now, we're creeping up on, well, actually, we're at 15 years of my personal management of the Rio Grande Foundation. I started on March the 1st, 2016. But Hillsdale really had kind of gotten off the ground in Washington, D.C. at that point. Have you ever visited their campus? Or I'm sure they have a lot of people come in and a lot of great events there as well.
Yeah, I've not been there. We call it WHIP. It's the Washington Hillsdale Internship Program. And they have other programs there as well. But I've heard nothing but good about it. But I did not personally take part in it.
Okay. Yeah, I know they have offices there. I don't think they're, unlike almost everybody else that has a DC office. I don't think Hillsdale does any direct lobbying, but I'm sure it's educational. It's attempting to reach out to those armies of interns that show up in
Hmm.
Washington. I was one of those once upon a time, and other folks who are engaged in just getting your message out because Hillsdale, while anything but a traditional college or university, it definitely has its own message to share with folks in Washington, D.C., which is basically stop doing everything you're doing and go the opposite direction,
Yeah,
which is
pretty
the
much.
same message we have.
Yeah.
So that's why we have folks like yourself coming out here. Well, let's change a little bit of direction yet again. And, we've talked about the politics of New Mexico, and, life is more than politics. And of course, unfortunately, especially for the last year, and we're right at that COVID anniversary. March 11th is the day I ascribe to the lockdown here in New Mexico. So a lot of events that would typically happen even in the short time that you've been here as an intern, notably the legislative session, you'd see people doing dances and performances and all kinds of organizations up at the Roundhouse. What have you done and particularly enjoyed in your time here in New Mexico? And you still have a few weeks to go, but anything that you uh, particularly like about what we have to offer here in New Mexico?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I've only been to New Mexico, during quarantine, so that's kind of limited my experience. But I have had the opportunity to, I was up in Santa Fe this last weekend, up in Taos the weekend before, so I've seen a fair amount of the state, and it's obviously very different from anywhere I grew up. I was just commenting to a friend the other day that, you don't really see trees like you do in Michigan. It's you have some brush and stuff, but you get up. I've hiked the volcanoes uh, just west of Albuquerque a few times now, and you get up there, and it seems like you can't really see that many trees. But so that's interesting. I think just to see how diverse of a landscape we have here in America. Um, See, some of my other favorite things. I think just the depth of history that New Mexico has. Going back to the Native Americans and the Spanish, and then the Americans who came later. Um, it's just very interesting to see the layers of history and the different kinds of art that you see that come along with that. Some of the more traditional artistic modes from the Native Americans, as well as all the Spanish you see around here. That's certainly not something I ever saw growing up. The mountains, I really love the mountains. I grew up in New England, so I have a deep affinity for mountains, and that we don't really have that where I'm from in Michigan now. So to be able to get up every morning and see the Sandias out my window, and then driving into work and see the volcanoes, and then you go hiking a little bit and you can see the Jemez Mountains and the Sangre de Cristos. I really, it's really adds a lot to my experience to see those. I think probably if you're from New Mexico, you take that for granted, but when you're a flatlander like me these days, it's pretty awesome.
And we went snowshoeing one day up near the Santa Fe ski hill,
Hmm.
and not that you can't do that. I don't know about in every winter in Michigan. You certainly seem to have cold weather every winter and enough snow, but I could be wrong. Being from Ohio, from southern Ohio, it's actually pretty rare that you have that amount of snow available to go snowshoeing, but maybe in Michigan it's a little different.
Yeah, we've had some weird winters recently. Actually, it seems like we get like a ton of snow and then it all melts and we're back to the grass. So it's no, I haven't really been snowshoeing in quite a while actually. So that was a lot of fun.
And you drove around the east side of the mountains, around the Sandias to Madrid and some of those little areas. You don't probably have many ghost towns or mining communities up in Michigan that are, not that Madrid is a ghost town. It's kind of a ghost town that's got enough going on that it's still there, but it's a quaint little mountain town that used to be a mining town and still has some mojo there.
Yeah, it's I think it's a little different than Michigan. You know, you have little farming communities in Michigan. I think out here it's the mining communities, which has a little different flavor, I guess. But um, yeah, it's been really beautiful being out here.
Yeah, well, it is a beautiful state, and gosh, I wish we had more solid economic policy to attract more people here, more jobs, more economic growth. But this whole COVID situation is changing the economy as we speak, and I know we've talked about how hard housing is to come by, especially longer term housing. Buying a house or even rental property. The price is going up rather dramatically, and it's a very interesting time. So you're a college graduate, and as we conclude the last few minutes of this show, what do you want to be a public policy analyst or expert? You want to do this as your profession uh, in the future?
Well, I'm certainly open to the opportunities that life presents to me, but yes, I am actually pursuing further opportunities to continue working in policy. I, you mentioned grad school; it's certainly still on the table for at some point, but I think for the time being, I'm continuing to look for opportunities in policy.
Well, of course, as you well know, but I would be remiss in if I didn't say that the Michigan has one of the finest state-based think tanks in America and largest, I might add. You certainly have seen the one of the smaller state think tanks, but Mackinac Center up in Midland, Michigan, which people might need a map of Michigan after they're done with this episode. But you can use the hand. And for those of you watching, I know that's the famous Michigan approach to geography is using your hands and sharing with folks exactly where different parts of Michigan are. But Midland is known for Dow Chemical. That's the famous company that's located there. I know that doesn't do much for folks geographically speaking, but Mackinac is a great organization, and they would be lucky to have you. So if that comes along, please let me know. But yeah, it's any final words for us here on Tipping Point, New Mexico, as we conclude this episode?
I would say be sure to keep an eye out on the blog as we are closing out the legislative session. I'm sure there's a flurry of activity that'll be happening, hopefully with some good bills, and I'm sure also with some bad ones as well. So be sure to get involved and call up your legislators and tell them what's what.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate, Clint has more material on the blog probably than any other intern we've ever had, simply because that opportunity to be here during a legislative session really has given you the opportunity to run point on a lot of legislative priorities and at least sharing that information. And the more that we have people who subscribe to our email list, and share that information with members of the legislature, emails, phone calls, whatever it is. We need to start in New Mexico by electing a better legislature. And that is what's going to ultimately turn our state around politically, is having legislators who understand free markets, educational choice, and various policies that I know you've worked on and you've come to understand, at least from a New Mexico perspective, pretty darn well. But we definitely encourage folks, and we have spent a lot of time engaging with the legislature, and Clint has been able to do that. And certainly, if not a baptism of fire, at least you've certainly come to know New Mexico politics in a very short time period, probably better than most New Mexicans.
Yeah, it's amazing how much goes on that you never even think about, but that's going to affect your day-to-day life. So that's definitely something I'll take away, that state politics is not to be ignored, even though the federal level gets all the attention.
Absolutely. Well, that is a topic for another day, and there is plenty going on in Washington, and there's also plenty of job opportunities up there, which is how I got into the public policy, movement, the work in that field was going to Washington, D.C. and learning and seeing how things are done up there before I came out to do state policy. But definitely agree, state policy is where it's at. Federal, it's like a giant medicine ball. You're all just pushing. Everybody's pushing and trying to get even an inch of ground. Where, unfortunately, New Mexico, from the conservative side, even that inch of ground would be welcome these days. But hopefully, brighter days are ahead for this state. But boy, as long as the federal government's throwing out $2 trillion, and that'll be the next podcast we talk about that. But yeah, it's a challenge. So, well, Clint, thanks for all your hard work at the Rio Grande Foundation. I hope folks go in, check it out, and more importantly, go ahead and reach out to their legislators. And you've got all that contact information in your posts, each individual post at errorsofenchantment.com. So it's a great tool right there and a great resource for everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, and have your Google Home play Tipping Point, New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.